Hi, Blogging Heads viewers. It's Daniel Strauss with my teammates, Betsy Woodruff, and this is Woodruff and Strauss. We are back for another episode. We're going to do this a little quick. Happy weekend. It's Friday afternoon, and here we go. We're going to talk about Carson. We're going to talk about criminal justice reform. Then I have a bit of a rant to go on. And
buckle up, y'all.
Yeah, buckle up, y'all. How are you, Betsy? I haven't seen you in like a week or 10 days.
So long.
And we've been
crazy.
Yeah, you were riding like horses or something. I saw.
We had a party celebrating the adoption of my little sister, and we had my other sister's friends brought a horse and a pony. So
was there an elephant?
Oh no, that's different. I went to a Renaissance festival. So here's something kind of funny. I went to a Renaissance festival with a couple coworkers, but I'd never been to a Renaissance fair before. Turns out they are awesome. So fun. So much fun.
They're great. They're great in all kinds of ways.
And my bureau chief is Will Ryan, and he goes on Red Eye on Fox News a lot. And we saw this one guy at the Renaissance fair wearing like a very dramatic hat, kind of sweeped over breeches, sort of a blue tunic, kind of dressed like a wizard. He might have had a wizard staff or something. And we'd just gotten there, and I was just like, oh my gosh, we have to talk to this guy. We have to get a picture with him. This guy looks amazing. I'm so excited about this. So I went up, and I was like, hi there. Is it okay if we get a picture with you? And
it was Jeb Bush or something.
It was Jeb Bush. And he said, well, actually, I was going to try to get a picture with you guys. Is your name Will? Are you Will Ron? I follow you on Twitter.
You're fans. You're Twitter fans.
Yes, you recognized him.
The DC bureau chief for the Daily Beast, his Twitter fans dress up as wizards and go to Renaissance Festival. That's awesome. That's America.
It's awesome. It's awesome. Yeah. Will might as well just quit because his life is not going to get better. Anyway. We could segue from people wearing ridiculous costumes and acting like they're from another period of time to the Republican presidential campaign.
It's so different from all of that. So now we have a new, not second place front runner, yes, and it is Ben Carson. I swear I'm done. Okay, I'm done eating. And Carson is catching up behind Donald Trump. In a weird way. And the reporting we've done here at Politico on this is that a lot of people who like Trump and Carson feel that they have this outsider appeal that most of the rest of the field has. This is especially important because in Iowa, Carson is pulling ahead as Scott Walker, who used to be the Iowa frontrunner, has declined dramatically.
Yeah.
All right.
The bottom fell out there.
Right. Now, to caveat this, we've seen this in 2012 where like polls go up, polls go down. It's still early. There hasn't been any caucuses, but damn.
Yeah. It's dramatic.
And Trump has lasted a while. All right. Yep. I mean, he's here to stay, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. Every Trump obit that was written has been wrong.
Yep.
Everything he said where people are like, oh, well, that's going to end his campaign. People have been wrong about it, consistently wrong. So, I see no reason to think that that's changed.
But the Carson thing, I mean, it's interesting to me because Carson hasn't. This campaign wasn't particularly well organized. The Washington Post months back reported that some of Carson's senior staff had left to form a third super PAC, and the implication was that a lot of these guys were just in it for the money and sort of. But he's surging and he's doing well. People like the soft-spoken African-American neurosurgeon who breathes fire, but in a very sort of like approachable manner.
He's very affable.
Yeah.
I think what Trump and Carson have in common is that the way they talk about political issues and, national problems and public policy feels very different from the way most elected officials do. And I don't know if there's a vocabulary word for the way elected officials talk. But you talk to them like they're all super on message. They have their talking points memorized. They're very predictable as far as what they're going to say. They use a very small vocabulary, a very small range of phrases to describe what's happening in this country.
Right.
And Carson and Trump don't do that. And this is something we've talked about a lot, is the fact that if you watch a Donald Trump press conference, it's interesting. Everything that happens is interesting.
You never know what he's going to say.
You never know what he's going to say. I mean, yesterday we had a stampede through our office when we heard he was on The View. It was just like, charge. It's like Black Friday at Target. And I imagine we're not the only office that has that happen.
No, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. It's just,
Yeah.
And I've been to
and I would argue that Carson is comparable in that the way he talks about things is just unexpected, and it's something that our ears are not dulled to.
Mm-hmm.
I just find it easier to listen to him. I find him more, I don't know, entertaining, even engaging. And for instance, someone like Ted Cruz or Chris Christie, even Chris Christie, who's kind of famous for not talking that way. Especially like, Jeb Bush.
I mean, these guys have like outmaneuvered the ones who are usually the eyebrow raisers, like Huckabee or Cruz on this. Although Cruz, as I've said in previous episodes, I think he's going to last a while.
I think so too.
I think he's just going to absorb a lot of this as each of these candidates, as the winnowing happens. But you're right, there is something novel to them, and I think that's part of the reason that Trump and Carson are surging, but Huckabee isn't, because we've seen Huckabee before.
I think so too. Yeah.
So, I mean, we're in the 2016 season now, Betsy, so we can ask the question, what do they have to do at the next debate? Like, what has to happen?
I'm so excited.
But the important thing about the next debate is that there are 11 instead of 10. Carly Fiorina was on the stage because the debate rules changed. CNN shifted a few things around, letting Carly on the debate. So now there's a woman on there. Yeah, which is fun. And it gives Carly a little legitimacy.
Yeah, I mean, she's polling well.
Yeah, she's polling well.
Do not suck.
People I talk to in New Hampshire say a lot that, like, you got to watch Carly because she's going to be a sleeper there over time. And
Sure.
I think the difference between Carly and Trump and Carson is that she doesn't say as bombastic things, but it's still.
She doesn't say dumb stuff usually.
Do you have any sense of like how serious Carson is regarded on a policy level? Because not really.
But this is, but I think what's interesting is like this really isn't a policy election.
Yeah.
No one's arguing about their plans. No one's talking about minutiae of policy detail. People are being incredibly non-specific. Even the criticisms that candidates are lobbing at each other have nothing to do with policy or with their voting records.
No. The attacks between
Scott Walker releasing his healthcare plan almost was totally ignored. Even though there's a lot in there that conservatives historically might have criticized.
Yeah, and it was even more so this week with Walker and his labor plan.
Yeah. Just don't see it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the attacks that you see going between Carson and Trump are like they've been going back and forth about who's got a better sense of faith and Christianity. Trump is on defense there because he was asked in an interview with Bloomberg News or Bloomberg Politics about his favorite Bible verse, and it was it was almost Sarah Palin's all of them.
Did you say that? Oh, man. And I'm very ambivalent about asking politicians questions like that and policing.
It's a throwaway question.
I mean, yeah, and I mean, it's kind of fair. I doubt they would ask that to any candidates who they thought differently about their faith, because that's not because they were genuinely concerned genuinely curious about certain Bible. That's because the subtext of that question was Donald Trump doesn't read the Bible. He doesn't have a favorite Bible verse. Let's ask him this question to trip him up.
Right.
And I'm ambivalent about that. I mean, it's almost like when they asked Ted Cruz what his favorite Cuban dish was or what his favorite Cuban music was. And it's just like,
I don't know. My last name is Strauss. I don't have a favorite German food or something.
But like, that's not a campaign issue for you,
No, it's not. It's not a campaign issue yet.
Maybe if you were running for office in Germany. Maybe if you marched in a German festival. I don't know. It'd be like asking a female candidate, like, when was the last time she got her period or something. You'd just be like, why?
Well,
I mean, not the same, but you just be like, why are you saying that?
Right.
Asking a female candidate, like, where she buys her shoes.
Exactly.
I'm not in love with it. But whatever. I'm also not super exercised about it.
Yeah. I am. So I don't know about you. I'm a little more convinced that Trump is going to stay for a while. I am not. I haven't seen enough polling, and this Carson surge is so new that I don't know if it's going to last. It might. It might not. I haven't seen too much evidence that they are.
That's a bold stance to take. It might not.
It might not. Might not. Who knows? Who's to say? The last thing I want to say on this and move to criminal justice reform and policy stuff you can tell me about here is I have not seen so far, like, to Trump's credit, his campaign has invested in building his ground operation a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I have not seen that same sort of like push so far with the Carson campaign, but still new.
That's correct.
You know, so it still could happen. And the super PAC, one of the super PACs for Carson has been doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So there are ads out there. Let's talk about criminal justice reform.
Yeah, which specifically about criminal justice and how it relates to undocumented immigrants.
Yeah,
which is kind of a 2016 issue. I'm sure people are familiar with the killing of Kate Steinle, who is a woman who was shot by an undocumented immigrant, allegedly. I believe he's confessed, but we say allegedly, in San Francisco a couple months ago.
Who Donald Trump cites a lot.
Who Donald Trump brings up a lot. So Bill O'Reilly has kind of made it his signature issue to push for the passage of legislation called Kate's Law. Kate Steinle's parents are also pushing for the passage of this legislation. Ted Cruz introduced the Senate version of the bill. It's not like a headline issue, but it's certainly percolating. And Trump talks about Kate Steinle's death a lot. And what's interesting about this legislation is that at the crux of it is imposing a new mandatory minimum sentencing requirement for undocumented immigrants who are deported and then come back into the United States again illegally. So right now, there's not a mandatory minimum sentence that people convicted of that crime have to serve, as far as I know. This law would make it so that if you are convicted of that crime, you have to spend 5 years in prison, which the argument for that is that it would be a stronger deterrent of undocumented immigration, and that it would keep potentially dangerous people off the streets, and I don't know, truth in sentencing. The criticism of that is that, first off, regarding the deterrent effectiveness of mandatory minimum sentencing, we have tons of mandatory minimum sentences, many of them much more steep for drug-related crimes. And since the implementation of those sentences, a lot of which happened under Bill Clinton, there's zero evidence that there's a causal link between how much time someone serves after they commit a crime and whether they're likely to commit that crime. Right. There's just no numbers that show that these tough sentences discourage people from committing these crimes, or discourage them from the risky behavior associated with the crimes. There was the process of entering the United States illegally, especially if you're coming from Central America, it's real hard. Southern Pulse.
Betsy, I'm going to stop you for a second here.
Okay.
Actually, AP's just reporting that Rick Perry's dropping out of the 2016 presidential race.
Ooh,
so, by the way, our handler, Aria, will be very happy as we pivot to that in real time on this. So, did we see this coming?
Did we see this coming?
Do you need to get off in a few minutes?
No, I'm just checking my email to see if anyone's yelling at me about that. Interesting. That is good to know.
So we saw this coming, though. The background.
Yeah, this is not surprising. This is one of the least surprising things that could have happened.
Right.
So let me finish up my spiel on Kate's Law, and then let's talk about Rick Perry. How's that?
Yeah.
So going back to the Kate's Law spiel, first, very little evidence, if any, that it's a deterrent. Second, Southern Pulse, which is a corporation, has had this fascinating almost explainer back in 2011 of what the process is like of migrating from, say, El Salvador or Honduras to Texas. And most of these migrants, as they detailed it, end up in Houston. Part of it involves walking from McAllen, Texas to Houston. That's a very common route used by coyotes who smuggle people into the United States.
Right.
You can only walk at night, and it's upwards of like 100 hours.
Right.
Those are not people who are like, oh, well, there's a 5-year mandatory minimum sentence. I guess I'm not going to walk for 100 hours at night with basically no food.
Right.
My editor is yelling at me about Rick Perry dropping out. Okay. The idea that this law would make a difference is uncompelling. And then sort of the flip side of that is that if you were super expensive, something like $2 billion a year, we'd have to build 30 new prisons. We'd probably incarcerate about 60,000 more people every year. So conservative criminal justice reformers are against it, understandably. But, yeah.
So are we, let me ask you something related to this, in sort of a 3-minute response. Have we seen, what have the usual suspects in the 2016 field who want to talk about criminal justice reform, how have they responded to this? That's the guys who I think of are Rand, Walker, Christie to an extent, maybe Ted, and Trump.
Well, Christie would probably favor it just because Christie is sort of a tough on crime.
Yeah.
Is not on board with any
former attorney general takes a lot of pride in that.
Christie likes putting people in jail. I haven't heard Rand talk about it. He might have. I just haven't heard that.
Right.
And then who else did you mention? Walker.
Yeah.
I don't know that Walker's talked about it. He might have. I don't know. And then did you mention somebody else?
Christie, Rand.
Oh, so one interesting thing is that Mike Lee, who is one of Ted Cruz's allies on the Hill, is against it. Mm-hmm. His comms guy told me they oppose any new mandatory minimum sentence requirements. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. Should we talk about Rick Perry briefly?
Yeah, why don't we move to Perry
to wrap up this lightning round?
Yeah. Well,
so not surprising.
Not surprising. My new colleague, Shane Goldmacher, when he was at the National Journal, broke a story about how his campaign had stopped paying staff a little while ago. And this was sort of the harbinger for this. And they got a quote from one of the heads of the super PAC, I think, who said basically the campaign said we're going to live off the land. And the super PAC was going to pick up a lot of the slack on this. So that was that. And we kind of saw this coming. Perry, who was who had his moment in the last election cycle and everyone thought he was going to shake things up, sort of floundered, and he sort of floundered during the last debate, and that was it. It wasn't for lack of having a strong team. And frankly, his super PAC, run by Haley Barbour's family, which is a sort of an influential political family full of operatives who are very capable, just, I guess, in the end, couldn't really pick up the slack for all of it. What do you think on this?
What do I think about it? I think it's great news for the other campaigns because they can start filching staff from Perry's team. Ovik Roy, who's one of his top policy advisors, is incredibly well respected, incredibly good at his job.
Especially in healthcare.
Yeah, so I would imagine his stock is extremely high right now. But yeah, not a surprise. It would, not a surprise. I imagine Perry is super disappointed. He's been working on this for a really long time. But
the idea was he was going to be smarter this time around. He was going to come off smarter,
change his perception, be taken more seriously. That obviously didn't work. So, what are you going to do?
Yeah, I mean, that was.
Maybe he can endorse someone and have some clout and campaign for somebody that he thinks would be good. His rollout, I thought, was really impressive. He had Taya Kyle, who's the wife of the American Sniper guy, Chris Kyle. He had Marcus Luttrell from Lone Survivor. Just a really impressive team, impressive group of supporters. But that only takes you so far.
Yeah. So that is that. That's it. I guess, do we want to call it, or do we want to go with my rant?
I think, can you give your rant in 30 seconds?
30 seconds. I think Idris Elba should be the next James Bond for multiple reasons. The current writer of James Bond novels said he was too street. This is not the original writer of the James Bond books. I think that's ridiculous. I think alone, it would be such a pivotal moment to have a first black James Bond. I think the crowd would go crazy. I think he's polished enough. And he needs to be. And Daniel Craig, is he really less rugged than, so I think that would be ridiculous. I had a much more fervent rant about it, but as I hope our viewers can respect, you and I are kind of itching to get off now.
I think one other thing about Idris Elba being Bond is that James Bond is typically Scottish, and in the 60s, and sort of the dynamics of the British Isles, Scottish people were kind of marginalized, taken less seriously, seen as lesser members of society, which in a way I think people argue is analogous to the way African Americans are treated in the United States.
You said that a lot better than I did. So that's
it's like having an African American actress play Annie,
Well, that just happened.
Not the same.
But
obviously, the way redheads were treated in the 40s is not the same as the way African American girls are treated in the aughts. But there's some parallels.
There's some parallels. All right. Well, Betsy, thanks so much. This has been good. Let's go talk to our editors right now.
Do it again soon next time somebody drops out of the presidential race.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.